we'd love to hear about how the idea of XD started, and then how you got buy-in and resources, and how that all came about.
Yeah, it's definitely a couple things were going on. I mean, I'll say the biggest thing was that so when I joined Adobe, every designer at Adobe in Adobe Design, which it wasn't, was a pretty fair size, internal organization, but it was like, again, like maybe 100 designers in a company of thousands of engineers. When I joined, they were actually all using a tool that I never really used a lot, and that was they all were using Fireworks. If not,
I
I
remember
think,
Fireworks. I used
yeah,
Fireworks.
yeah. Well, you use Fireworks. I think most people's experience with Fireworks was like a year where when you chose this one option in Photoshop, it would just sort of suddenly launch this other program called
Yep.
Fireworks. I think it's actually how probably most people who are around the same age as you and I probably remember Fireworks, and for everybody else, it's just like what the hell's Fireworks, But I came in and I didn't get it at first. Honestly, I was like looking at this thing, and of course, I was a big Illustrator was my jam. InDesign, I'm fine at Photoshop. Photoshop is just never. There's a few things that always kind of eluded me. I think it was the fact that you could do like the same thing like a half dozen or more ways, get
Right.
like the same result, and that drove me crazy, right? And so I gravitated more towards like tools I could really wrap my head around, kind of best practices, right? So I was using that, and they came in and they're using Fireworks. I'm like, what is this? But then I started using it, and I figured out what it was, why they were all using it. It was the tool that was made for screens.
Yeah.
Photoshop was made for pixels, and I won't take away from that. But Photoshop, at the end of the day, was meant to print high resolution
For
composite
photos,
images,
right?
photos,
Shopping photos.
and composite images, right? Illustrator, same thing. Illustrator was made for print, right? Yeah, vector graphics. Vector graphics are great for screen or print, but you get unlimited resolution, with vectors. And so and of course, that was the medium of the formative phase of those two applications was print. And I come in, and of course, Adobe Design was made up of really the reason there's a design organization at Adobe was because of Macromedia. When they acquired Macromedia, I mean, before all the Adobe designers actually reported into engineering organizations. But when Adobe purchased Macromedia, Flash, Fireworks, Freehand, all that stuff, Macromedia had a really strong design culture, and they had a centralized design team, and they brought that with them into Adobe. Not only did they bring that, they brought their affinity for the tool that they made for themselves, which was Fireworks, the tool that was of the screen and for the screen, 100%. And so everything in that app was really oriented towards that outcome. And so it was so accurate. You could do things like sub-pixel hinting, where you could go in there and you could see the pixels, and you could nudge the little vector line that was sort of backing the shape itself, the integrity of the shape. You could like nudge those vector points, and you could nudge the pixels, right? Yeah. So, our icon team, of course, built, amazingly powerful workflows on top of that. And then there was all this other stuff that just wasn't being utilized inside of Fireworks that I just loved, which was, there was prototyping in Fireworks. You could make a multi-page website and have it be clickable, and run it from a local host, inside of Fireworks. There were, like master style, main style workflows. So like I just fell in love with it. I got it immediately. And of course, then it was one file. The file size was really small compared to a Photoshop document. And it was just so efficient and accurate and powerful. And just like, wow, this is amazing. So I finally got it. And so this was sort of the setup, which is like, they decided to stop development on Fireworks right at this critical moment when our work at Adobe Design was transitioning from, pretty much static screens, right? Like walking people through static screen, screen by screen, each sort of, state or version of this design, to prototyping, right? What we could probably call prototyping, which was, the taking interactivity and animation to create a version of your design that was interactive, that you could actually evaluate before you hand it over to developers, right? So again, we just were losing our tool of choice right at this time when the demands on our jobs, things that we were trying to do ourselves and really push the envelope forward in terms of storytelling and design and iteration. Just at the time we're trying all different kinds of tools to like augment this to get these great results, to get these interactive results. Right, like a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings, as we heard you used to toss around in those early days. So right, we're losing our tool of choice. We're trying to adapt to this new world. What are we going to use? We're like, well, we all had internalized the challenges of using Photoshop and Illustrator, and we still use them, but not for our day-to-day work. So, we were doing things like I was pretty much almost exclusively working in Keynote at that point, creating the assets inside of Illustrator or Photoshop, and then basically like compiling it all together in Keynote so that at least it would move. At least I could tell a story, a narrative.
I've heard some
story.
organizations, did use that Keynote as a prototyping tool.
Still an amazing tool. So, so, and others were using, a ton of other tools at the time sort of cropping up, because you could see there was this unmet need. So, okay, so this is the environment that I'm sort of, we're looking at. And and that was kind of happening in Adobe Design. I actually stood up and said to my director at the time, hey, I want to be involved in a project to create, we need this next tool. I want to be a part of this. And so I kind of came together with with an engineer, with actually one of our Adobe fellows at the time, and I started to work on a proto version of something like XD.